Hi, I'm Frank Hanavan, and I'm an artist. I'm interested in Admiral Nelson and the Battle of Trafalgar. I'm working on a painting of a scene from the Battle of Trafalgar of ships that were at the battle, but this isn't, in this particular instance, not the battle itself, but this is the frigate Euryalus. The Battle of Trafalgar took place off of Cape Trafalgar in 1805, and it involved sailing ships, two fleets, the French fleet and the Spanish fleet, fighting the British fleet. Here's a drawing of the Battle of Trafalgar. The blue ones are the British, the red ones are the Spanish and the French, and there's a little ship here called the Euryalus, if you can see that. I'm saying little. They all look the same to you, but these are bigger ships, and this is a smaller one, a frigate. And I am painting the Euryalus, and I'm trying to get a scene that would be referencing the Battle of Trafalgar. So I started this process by getting interested in the battle and then researching it. And in this case, these are photos of models that I have built. I built two models like this one, right? And I photographed them in various aspects and stuck them into Photoshop, right? And then I was able to edit them in different ways and wind up with these compositions where I had arranged the photographs together onto a background that I had created from a photograph of the sky and the photograph of the sea. See, those are the same two ships photographed over and over and then cut and pasted into the surface. And I'm doing this because I'm trying to lay out what I think are going to be these paintings I want to do at the Battle of Trafalgar. So I'm going to do one with these larger ships in a large format with like 10 ships all at once. But I'm also working on this one, which is just a single ship, one of the smaller ones there that day, in seas that are going to be similar to the Battle of Trafalgar. Although in this case, what we're seeing is just some all-friendly ships. These are all British. I want to do a bunch of these videos where I describe my process and what I'm thinking about and what I'm doing. I feel it's instructive to hear people who make stuff talk about the aspects of making them, how they make their decisions, what about their experience they bring to a project that leads them to use the tools a certain way. And when I say tools, I should be making air quotes, because the tools can be all these other things than just like physical objects. Although in this case, I am making this ship kind of in a figurative way on the two-dimensional plane. I'm also kind of creating it as a three-dimensional object before it can begin. So there exists on the internet drawings of the actual ship. These were drawings that were made in a shipyard when the ship was being repaired. And this is the Euryalus. This is what she looked like. And I've added some color and stuff and altered a little bit of this in Photoshop. But these are the drawings that were made in the 1800s of the ship itself. So with that resource, oh, and also across the top, see this railroad track looking thing that looks like a fence? That's a scale. So each one of those little hash marks is 5 feet. So you can figure out exactly how big it is, right, by comparing it in the scale. And I did this to create this. But I took the interim step of first making this, which is a scale drawing with the rig attached. So it's this drawing, the original one, that I scaled up to make a pencil version, right? And in the physical act of doing the drawing, even though I don't include every detail on the deck, my brain is forced to kind of crawl inside every one of these details. Because as you're making a drawing, it's easy for your eye to look at a drawing and then skip across the surface of it and say like, oh yeah, this exists over here, this exists over here. But when you actually have to physically draw it yourself, you are opening up the lid and looking at the inner workings. You know, you're getting more intimately associated with it, so that when the time comes to put it onto a canvas, you are now familiar with this part of the ship in your mind because you recreated it on a piece of paper. You know what I'm saying? So I guess like if you wanted to really understand turkey dinner, right, you should go bake a turkey yourself, and then you're going to have a much better understanding of the turkey dinner if you eat some. My apologies to the vegetarians. So if you're a nautical painter, a maritime painter, you are joining a long fraternity that stretches back hundreds of years. There's been maritime paintings and there will be into the future. And right now, the state of maritime painting is kind of interesting. It's not what it always has been. But one thing is true is that like you really are expected to be accurate. So I felt that there's a burden on me to know as much as I can about the Euryalus if I'm going to paint the Euryalus, right? And it turns out there's a lot of that information available. But the part that I was getting at earlier is that like I really needed to understand the Euryalus like in its totality before I should try to paint it. Like I should really understand as much as I can about the ship ahead of time. So the original drawing that came to us from 1805 or whenever this drawing was made doesn't include the rigging. It just has the indication of where the masts are. But fortunately, there's books available that'll tell you proportionally how big these things would be. So I am able to determine from using sources that were available in the 1800s. They would arrive at the height of the main mast. That's this one. And it would be a ratio of the length of the hull and the width of the hull. And that would give you the height of the main mast. And from that, you could extrapolate the height and the width of everything. So all these yards, this is the main topsail yard. It's a proportion of the height of the main mast. And sometimes they'll just say that something is half the height of this or a third the height of that. But you can build the entire rig accurately in the way it would have been made in the 1800s using the descriptions that are given in these books, which I find really useful. And then anyway, I've also had like a background where I've done actual rigging on tall ships, so I have like a great understanding of like what are these things over here, you know, what am I looking at, so I can draw them and stuff, and it's important to do that. But I also come to it with some experience of actually working on the real ships. So I have this conceit that like my rigging is going to be really good, but I'm also aware that there's a lot of people who have painted ships who didn't have a rigging background, and it shows in that they will include details that aren't accurate, or they're not shown in a way that they would actually be used in the real life in these circumstances. So I kind of struggle with that a little bit myself because I have never sailed on a square rig ship. I've sailed on some schooners, but I've never sailed on a ship with yards with square sails. And I can read books about what they would do in certain wind circumstances and weather conditions, but I don't really know what it was really like because I wasn't really there. But I have done as much as I could to learn everything I could about it. So I am at a point now where I believe that it's a very windy day. There's a storm coming in, right? And these guys are reefing down, so they're shortening sail is the term the sailors would use because they're expecting the weather to get worse. So these sails up here have been lowered and taken in. They've been bundled up. So this shape here that looks like a marijuana cigarette is actually a sail that has been bundled up by the crew who have gone aloft, lowered the yard to this position, and then tied all that stuff in place. And those are the kind of details that most people wouldn't really understand what they were looking at. They'd understand that's a sailing ship, it's sailing. But, you know, if you ask them what was going on up here in the rig, they wouldn't necessarily know that, and they don't really necessarily need to know that. But if you're a maritime painter and you're trying to paint it accurately, then you should understand what they're doing and why and when. At what point would they take in the sails, and at what point would they do this and what, you know. So in this case, the wind is blowing, it's getting worse, the weather is starting to turn crappy, but these guys are undaunted. They've been doing this their whole lives, and they're used to this kind of a thing, and they are taking the appropriate steps. There's a lot of argument about what color the ships were painted. This yellow color gets argued about endlessly. Famously, there's a ship that still exists, the HMS Victory, which was at the Battle of Trafalgar. And they have actually been able to scrape off the old paint, drill down through the layers of paint, and find the original paint color. And it turns out it's like a pinkish terracotta color. And that threw everybody into a tizzy. Everybody was very upset that this shrine of a ship could be pink when everybody had been painting it yellow for the last 100 years. I'm still going with this like buff yellow color because there's an argument about the available pigments from the 1800s. Like if you made paint in the 1800s, there were some colors we have today that were not available back then, but yellow ochre has always been available. It's an earth tone, so it's just like clay that's a bright yellow color, and that's what that is. That's yellow ochre. And I think I'm okay using that, even though HMS Victory is more of a terracotta color. Anyway, I think that's it for today. I have a lot more to say, though. But this has been 9 minutes and going on 10. And I'm going to stop right here. But in future, I would like to take this stuff apart and talk more about each element. Like I talk about the water, how I arrived at the water. Talk about the sky. What was I thinking? Talk about the colors I chose for the other parts of the ship. Like what color is canvas? It's white, but it's not white, right? And then some of the things would just be questions about the nuts and bolts, the colors themselves. What do they mean? How do they work? So on and so forth. There's endless amounts of talk that I could do, and there's more information to be delved into, which I hope you're going to find worthwhile.